All right, thank you.
Yeah, there.
Well, I'd say our technology staff has really done a remarkable job with
Yes, they have.
keeping us all connected during this COVID crisis. All right, it is June 25th, 2020, 7:33 a.m., and we are shortly going to call to order the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority meeting for the city of Edina. But before we call the meeting to order, we've got a few things we have to talk about, and I will say that, again, welcome to the June 25th meeting. This meeting is being held electronically to comply with the governor's Stay Safe at Home Minnesota order and to ensure the safety of all residents and staff. All members of the HRA staff and presenters are participating from their homes or offices. Before we begin, there are a few things that we need to cover for those listening in and hoping to participate in any portion of the meeting. Today, community comment will be the only community call-in opportunity. So we do not have any public hearing matters. So if you have an opinion you want to express or a concern you want to express, you'll be allowed to speak about that during community comment. And it will cover, comments will cover anything not on the agenda today or scheduled for a future public hearing. If you want to call in for community comment, call 1-800-374-0221. And the conference code this morning is 889-6527, 889-6527. If you're calling in with a community comment, you have 3 minutes to speak. Our Executive Director and City Manager, Scott Neal, will let you know when your 3 minutes are up, and then you'll need to wrap up your comments. We ask that individuals do not repeat information already presented. Call in if you have new comments or information to bring forward that you haven't otherwise provided in writing or somebody else hasn't provided, so we can avoid redundancy. So thanks in advance for your patience as we work to conduct this meeting in the virtual world using different software types and many people participating from their own homes. We hope there won't be any difficulties technologically, but if there are, we'll try to fix them as quickly as we can. We'll now call the meeting to order. The meeting of the Housing and Redevelopment Authority is herewith called to order, and roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
Commissioner Brindle?
Here.
Commissioner Fisher?
Here.
Commissioner Stanton?
Here.
Chair Hovland?
Here. The next matter on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. And I will rise to say the Pledge of Allegiance, and I think everybody else's microphone is off. There should be a flag on the screen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the meeting agenda. Does anyone have any modifications of the proposed meeting agenda? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the meeting agenda as shown.
So moved.
Is there a motion? Okay. So moved by Member Fisher. Was that it?
Correct. Second.
Second by Member Stanton or Member?
That was me.
All right. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, on approval of the meeting agenda.
Commissioner Anderson?
Aye.
Commissioner Brindle?
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Stanton?
Aye.
Chair Hovland?
Aye. The meeting agenda is approved. The next portion of the meeting agenda deals with community comment, and I've got a couple of comments I need to make there from the script as well. So it is now time to hear from any residents who would like to speak about something not on today's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing to participate in community comment. Again, reminding you to call in at 800-374-0221. The conference ID number is 889-6527. Press *1 to speak. You'll be put in contact with an operator who will then put you in the queue to speak. You'll be muted until it's your turn to speak, and then you'll be given 3 minutes to speak. Start by giving your full name and street address. Executive Director Scott Neal will time you, and then they will let you know when you go over the 3-minute mark and need to wrap up your comments. Director Benarod, is there anyone in the queue to speak this morning?
Good morning, Chair Hovland, members of the commission. We do not yet have anyone on the intercall. As with other meetings, I would recommend that you pause just for a minute in case we have some other people call in, as there is a slight delay in the broadcast. After about a minute or so, if no one calls in, I think it will be safe for you to move on in the agenda.
All right, very good. So this is a mini coffee break for those of us that have a coffee cup in front of them. While we wait to see what happens here. All right, I think we will move on. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda and the adoption of the consent agenda. Is there any commissioner that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? Hearing nothing, is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda as shown on the main agenda, on the meeting agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Member Brindle,
Second?
second by Member Anderson. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, with respect to potential adoption of the consent agenda.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Brindle,
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Stanton,
Aye.
Chair Hovland.
Aye. The consent agenda items are approved. There are 3 items on the consent agenda this morning. The heart of our meeting this morning is in the reports and recommendations portion of the agenda, which we're now going to proceed to. And that is a follow-up on a fleeting discussion we had a couple of weeks ago about our public works site, the long-admired public works site at 5146 Eden Avenue, and potential redevelopment and reuse of that property, revisiting it for the, I don't know which time we're on here. But we've had many, many discussions on this, and I think it's appropriate to have another one, and I think staff does as well, and I think all of our commissioners are thinking the same. So we're going to have Bill Neuendorf lead off that conversation this morning. He's going to share his screen with a presentation that was part of our materials that came to us over the last couple of days. So I'll now turn it over to our Economic Development Director, Bill Neuendorf. Director Neuendorf.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Let me share my screen here, and we'll run through the presentation that was in the packet. So the conversation this morning and the intention of this brief presentation is strictly for discussion purposes. This morning, we're not seeking any action. We're not making any firm recommendation, but we simply wanted to be responsive to the suggestion a few weeks ago that we have a more dedicated conversation about this property. So the property in question is the vacant lot that was formerly used as Edina's public works facility, located at Eden Avenue and Arcadia. And this morning, the presentation is relatively brief. I wanted to run through the guiding principles for this district, give you an update on the current status of the property, lay out some options to consider, sneak preview. They're the same options we've had in front of us for the last several years. We did want to put forth a possible concept or strategy to consider, and then use that to springboard into the discussion. So for this property, we think it's very important to recognize all of the effort, time, and energy that's gone into the early planning for not just this site, but the entire Grandview district. Dating back to 2011 and 2012, citizen groups arrived at 7 guiding principles to be considered as projects get underway in this Grandview district. I'm not going to go through these principles, but I think it is important to remember that these guide our actions. The current status of the site is fairly evident if you drive by it. Our redevelopment efforts have been on hold for a little bit over a year. This group, the HRA board, discussed this property back in January and then again in May of 2019. And at that point in time, staff was directed to put things on hold while we waited for the Housing Task Force to complete their work. Since that initial goal, the task force, originally we had hoped to have their work product finished by the middle of last year. That time frame has been extended and expanded to the end of this year. So that's our activities have really been on hold for several months now. We know that there is continued market interest in the site. We hear from multifamily developers, both market rate and affordable. We hear from commercial developers that have interest. So we know that there's still market demand out there. Certainly with the pandemic that we're currently operating under, the impact is unknown, right? I mean, that could delay projects, could accelerate other types of projects. So we're not really certain of that COVID-19 impact today, but we know that there's still interest, even in this days of the pandemic. I think one of the other important things to recognize is that while the site is about 3.5 acres, that's a good sized site. It's not large enough to satisfy every interest and every concept that's been expressed over the years. So at some point in time, we'll have to select what elements fit best on a parcel of this property. We also know that in past conversations, we had explored the idea of constructing a new public facility on this property. And over the years, there's also been concerns about how a new facility would be paid for, and also concerns and cautions by staff about the size of our public debt. While our debt is certainly manageable, there's just concerns about going out to build a multi-million-dollar new facility at this particular time. And the last piece of information that we think is very important to recognize is that with the completion of the Avador Senior Apartments, there's a flow of incremental property tax dollars that are now available in this year to fund improvements throughout the district. So in our last HRA board meeting, staff laid out a proposal to explore some public improvements to design and build using those tax dollars. Chad Milner, our director of engineering, is currently working with a few different engineering and planning firms to put proposals together to start that work. But we do want to recognize that those funds are starting to roll in. As far as options, all the options that we've considered over the years remain viable. This is a slide that we pulled from last year's presentation. Certainly, the city, the HRA, can hold the land for future development. There's no immediate rush to do anything with it. That being said, we've been debating what to do for about 12 years now. We could sell or lease the property. We could construct a new public facility on the property, or we could do a combination. We could split the property, hold part, sell part, keep part, lots of different options. And each of those options are still on the table for this group to consider. At this point in time, based on some deadlines that we're operating under with the TIF district, staff is suggesting a two-part strategy to achieve some of the goals in our TIF plan, as well as our overall Grandview development framework. So the first step would be to pursue public improvements designed in 2020 and constructed in 2021. That was the work that you authorized us to explore last week, or at our last meeting. While you did not approve any construction expenses, we'll put bids together and put costs together, and we can make decisions in the future on that. The second element is to pursue mixed uses on this particular site, the old public works site, not this year, but next year, 2021 through 2022. There's just concerns with the pandemic in front of us. There's some concerns in the marketplace. We're not certain if it makes sense to try to rush to get something done when we don't necessarily have to. If at some point we do explore development on the site, some of the preferred outcomes could be as described here. First, I think it's important that with this property, we try to avoid duplication of what's happening elsewhere. For example, there's lots of market rate apartments that are being constructed pretty readily throughout many neighborhoods in Edina. So it might be best to avoid doing the same thing that the private sector is currently doing with no problem. We should also identify any of the required public realm elements and make sure that those are built into the site plan. For example, this area currently lacks sidewalks and bike amenities. It's been noted that Arcadia Avenue is very narrow. So with any of those public realm pieces, we should make sure that whatever happens on the property, that we make sure it's designed to include those future public improvements. And certainly some of the elements that might be considered, we discussed this last year, the idea of a senior housing cooperative and parking, perhaps on the north side of the property, with a public outdoor plaza in the middle of the property, and on the southern edge, commercial use or a future public use. From what we're hearing in the marketplace, we think there's legitimate demand for those types of uses. Again, we haven't seen any firm proposals, but just in conversations with developers, there's interest. So with those points in mind, we could prepare to develop part of the site in 2021. And we're recognizing that we might have to modify our existing TIF district to finance some of those public improvements, whether that's a wider street, an improved water main, room for sidewalks, would require that electrical transformers be moved. So there's lots of public expenses out there. And with this particular TIF district, we have a deadline of June of 2021 to make firm commitments. We don't think it's realistic to make all the site planning details for this property by that deadline. And we've explored a variety of outcomes with our financial and redevelopment consultants. They confirm that there are other options to use TIF if we choose, but we would have to modify the district. So to kind of lay that out, if we would pursue in the future, we could do a cooperative type housing, senior housing perhaps, on the northern portion of the property, where underground parking could readily be built. In the center, some type of public plaza so that there is public space, try to get some connection to the other side of the train tracks. And then on the southern edge, you've got more vehicle exposure there. That could be a good commercial site. There's been discussion about a future fire station. It might be a good site for that. We haven't fully explored what type of site parameters are best for fire stations, but certainly there's room for more than one project on this property. So with that background in mind, for discussion, some of the key questions that our staff's had, something that it would be helpful if we had some further direction or clarification. The time frame that we laid out or that we just summarized, does that make sense? Is that agreeable? We certainly could rush and try to do something this year to meet that summer 2021 deadline, or should we wait? Is it also agreeable that a mixture of uses happen on this site? Some developers would love to get the whole property and just do one big thing, but yet that isn't really in the spirit with the Grandview principles. And overall, is this process agreeable? We haven't recommended any particular process, but in the past, we certainly have discussed keeping the land, or if we do sell it, work with a handful of developers, narrow it down, and try to work out a deal with one of them. We could do a more public type process, and that could be a request for proposals for the site. That's a little bit more transparent, but it does add time and cost. And then the last question came up at our last conversation, but we are getting requests from developers to sit down with them to hear specific proposals. At this point in time, staff has not accepted those meetings. Certainly we'll take phone calls, but we haven't sat down. We're happy to get your direction. Should we be more interactive with developers, or are we still on hold? So those are some of the questions in staff's minds, and we have our staff on the call here this morning. We're happy to have to answer any questions and look forward to your discussion.
All right, thanks, Manager Neuendorf. Let you get back out of that screen again. Okay, good. So I think one of the real benefits of this council is that we've got two members of our council that were part of the original group of 52 people, as I recall, that helped create the vision and the framework and the 7 principles for this area. And then Mike Fisher, both Mike Fisher and Kevin Stanton were on that part of that active part of that group of 52 citizens and planning commission members. And then member Fisher is also actively engaged in his private business in TIF districts around the state, and also participated in the creation of the transportation plan for the Grandview district. So Commissioner Fisher, I'm wondering if you could lead off this conversation with your thoughts about some of the things that Mr. Neuendorf has talked about, and then we can maybe go to Member Stanton after that, and that might help us with this discussion that we're about to have. Commissioner Fisher?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. If it's all right, I'm going to share my screen. See if, Bill, is there any reason that wouldn't work?
I am not an IT guru, but it should work.
It should be just fine.
Okay. Just let me know if this comes up.
It's starting to come up. There we go.
Everyone see that?
Yes.
All right. So what I wanted to do is just take a few minutes, because I wasn't sure, as I was thinking about this last night and going through the packet, wasn't sure exactly how much time Bill would spend on how we got here today. And I think at the risk of boring some of you, I think it's really important to, as we talk about the public works site, that we take a step back and understand the context and how it fits into the whole, which is really what this has always been about, is a district. And so obviously we're aware of here the public works site in the middle of the district, but I want to pay particular attention to to the broad area and a lot of this highway infrastructure over here, and I'm going to make a few references to that area. Okay, I thought I could actually move this along. There we go. So Bill actually was talking about 2010, and frankly, this really started in 2008 with the comprehensive plan identifying Grandview as an area of change. In December of 2009, Commissioner Stanton and I were part of a group that came and proposed a process for the Grandview planning area, and we kicked off that process in April of 2010. And one of the elements was in April, a design workshop with a whole group of volunteer architects from Edina. And the reason I want to show this is I want to talk about planning and the importance of being nimble. and how things can change and they will change, and we have to be willing to change with it, especially over a period of 10 years. So in that group, the initial activity of all of this years of planning was this design workshop. And these are just 3 examples of sketches that were done by a variety of architects that live in Edina. And just to, this is the public works site in this area, and this area, and all 3 sketches. And this is City Hall, just to give reference. But in these various sketches, in all of the cases, there was this discussion about the public works site as a key node for some public space. But it started as more open space, not necessarily a building concept. And in this particular sketch on the right, these scribbles may not mean much to some of you, but to me, I remember very distinctly, we were circling opportunities for public buildings over on the east side of the highway, close to City Hall, in an area that is just a lot of freeway interchange activity. And as we move forward, so I want to reference that in a bit. Then in May of 2010, the council approved those guiding principles, which are really important and something we should absolutely be following. Then we finished the small area guide plan, which included those principles. Staff applied for a Met Council grant in 2011, got the $100,000 grant to then hire consultants to help us with the framework. And we started that in April of 2011, finished it in April of 2012. And I just want to put the framework up here because in reference to those original sketches, so when we worked with that whole group of folks on our committee, lots of opinions, lots of good ideas. And one of the, if I remember, now remember in those diagrams, we were showing some potential public buildings over here on the east side of the highway. And one of the concerns was that could take a long time to happen, and it may never happen. But the public works site is something we had today in 2010 or 12 when we were talking about it. So we should not plan on public buildings going someplace else when we have this site today. And so you'll see in this formation of the public process, we showed a public building over on the public works site, in addition to exterior public space. And I think that's important because that's been a center point or centerpiece of a lot of our discussions for the last 10 years. What is that public building? How does it fit with private development? And it's really, as I think about it, been a major stumbling block to us actually getting the public works site developed. And one of the reasons, as I think about why not, frankly, I think part of it is there hasn't been that hue and cry from the public in general, the demand, like, this is what we need to build, let's go. Now, we've for sure heard from pockets of people, some that wanted a community center. We've heard from some people that, an art center. I mean, frankly, we were trying to, as a council over time, have been trying to come up with ideas for what that public building is. When we've talked about it as an art center, which has been part of, and we've talked about a senior center and some elements of a community center, but in every case, there hasn't been that huge push from the community saying, absolutely, this is what we need. In fact, I remember distinctly that members of our own, Parks Commission and our arts community that have worked in the art center today have expressed concern about putting an art center in this location. So even the groups that you would think would be the most fired up haven't had that passion. So that's one element. I think another is that we don't have an appetite for adding a bunch more debt for something that we don't have this community clamor for. And then something that we should really consider is that the timing of public projects and the timing of private development don't always go hand in hand. And we've seen that. As we've worked with development partners on the public works site, we've run into this issue where a developer partner gets the idea formatted, they figure out their financing, and they want to go. In the public decision-making process does not work that way. And I think we have seen that play out over and over here. So those factors, in my mind, is why we haven't built that little purple shape there in any form on this site. And it's actually become a bit of a stumbling block, and why I think we're still sitting here today wondering what to do on the public works site. But I also, and I think much of the reasoning behind that came from several members of the committee and of the public, and fairly so, that, and if I could use air quotes right now, the comment was we should never give up public land. And I think that's a reasonable statement, that in general, a city should be very careful about giving up valuable public land that we currently control. But I think what we lose in that statement is the fact that we haven't, if we fully privately develop this site, for example, have we really given up public land when in fact we purchased a large site for the new public works facility, right? Since this all happened, we've purchased Weber Woods. We've purchased property on Market Street in the 50th and France area, and probably other properties that I'm not thinking of right now. But I can assure you that we have more public land today than we did in 2010 when that concern came up. Now, am I diminishing the importance of doing the right thing with public land that we control? Absolutely not. But I think we have to kind of keep that in mind. The other thing that I think I've learned as this process has ensued is that we have to stop focusing on the public works site as the project here. It is the piece of land that we control, so that I get that. But this is a full district plan from City Hall all the way over to Vernon. And I like to think of it as more of the 9-square game. You know, we have all of these sites and all of these elements, and we have to, and if you go to the very first principle, it says leverage publicly owned parcels to create a vibrant and connected district. It doesn't mean the public district has to be on our one public process, because we have to leverage that land to create this district. And I think we have to take a broader look at how we leverage that public property, whether or not that means the public use is on the property or not on the property. And I'm going to say a good example is the fire hall. Now, all of us have been receiving emails recently that, so it used to be that we got to put a community center there because we think we need a community center, and that's a piece of public land that we own. And then we talked about an arts center. Well, today, the theme of the day is a fire hall. Because we've identified a need to service the northeast part of our community. And so because we own a piece of public land, the fire hall must need to go here. Now, I don't think it's a horrible site for a fire hall, but I will tell you just that I think a better site is over on the east side of the highway. Now, whether that, and I think we have our historic buildings over there, and I've been saying for a long time, and I know some of you have, that as we redevelop this area, it's probably not, where we need to have our historic buildings, when in fact we have Arneson Acres where we have our history center. We could move these to the Grange Hall and the old school over onto that public property and have a consolidated history experience in our park, and put other uses that might be more appropriate here. One of them could be a fire hall close to our city hall. And frankly, in the future, if we wanted a community center, it is not a bad spot here as well. As we redevelop our frontage road system, and we've always talked about, parking below grade is possible on that side of the highway as it is under the public works site. So my point here is, we should be leveraging these parts and pieces and not assuming everything has to fit on this site. Just gonna, and I just wanted to share this image as well. This came from the framework in 2012, and again, it was showing a public facility, private development, and some exterior outdoor public plaza space. But it also showed this connection over to the other side of the highway. And by the way, this is the frontage road system that you see in those plans on both sides, which is a really important part of this. And it is, yes, it is related to the public works site. Just more on the planning. So we started our focus on the public works site in 2013, and then we started the Grandview District Transportation Study in 15, finished in 16, and that's the part I want. And Bill talked about the TIF. This transportation study lays out essentially the bones that are going to be important to the development of this district. So it's the streets and the parking and all of that kind of thing that we have to really think of long term about. That plan was split into the drawing that's up before you right now is the long-term vision, which is 15 to 30 years. Well, time moves pretty quickly. You know, we're going to be in that 10-year mark pretty soon. And so the question is, what are we doing to accomplish the parts and pieces? Now, we, of course, the Avador project has been built, and it was built in accordance with these plans, which is the great news that we have the potential to build some of this infrastructure. So Bill's suggestion, staff's suggestion, that we use the TIF, the increment coming from the Avador, to start building out some of at least preparing ourselves for this infrastructure is absolutely the right strategy. And I also agree with Bill that, so in our last meeting, I was a little concerned that we not squander the TIF opportunity with the public works site. And I have talked to Bill and talked to Nick Anhut, and I feel actually comfortable, and Bill is right, that we don't have to rush. We don't have to make rash decisions on the public works site to get TIF opportunities into the future. So we can use the increment that we've got from the Avador to make some of these, to make inroads into this plan. And then we can reconstruct TIF in the future when the timing is right to take the increment from the public works site and others that would be involved and continue the infrastructure piece. So I feel more comfortable today than I did when we last met because I've had time to think through that, and I think Bill's on the right track there. So my question is, or my thoughts about focusing back in on just the public works site is that we should not rush it, but I don't think we should not do anything either. I think the pandemic is a real reason maybe not to jump in and aggressively try to redevelop something this year. But I don't think we should turn down opportunities for, if a developer has a strong idea, we should listen to it and start a plan to move forward, because it is an opportunity site and it's just sitting there. So that is tax revenue that has been sitting for years and years, and we're doing nothing with it. And ultimately, that revenue is going to be critical, just as it was with the Avador, to leverage all 9 squares in our 9 square game. And that's the real important play here. So if I were developing based on everything that we've gone through, if I were putting out an RFP, or if I were talking with a developer tomorrow, the key things that I would want to have on the public works site are district parking at some level. And the reason that's important is the grade does allow for parking underneath some amount of development. Now, we've struggled making that parking financially doable, because we've also put on top of that another public facility. If we had a scenario that was mostly privately driven, I think we could still require some amount of district public parking, and the numbers might have a better chance of working because we're not loading so much public requirement on the site. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that district parking on that parcel can add the potential for better, more pedestrian-oriented development around the site. So we don't have to build a bunch of parking at all of these other sites years in the future. It can be part of this first piece. We also have to understand that if we do something like that, you can't just weigh the cost of that parking on the one development project. It has to be thought of as a longer term investment and allocated that way. And that's where the TIF part comes in. I do think we should have publicly accessible open space on the public works site. Does that mean it has to be publicly owned? I don't think so. I wouldn't rule it out. I think it's an option we should always look at, but we shouldn't rule out the fact that we could require in any development fully publicly accessible space on that site as part and keeping in the spirit of our principles for the district. I think we should always maintain a provision for a transit location on this site related to the rail. Now, I know today there isn't a rail line or a transit on that rail, but I can assure you someday, maybe it'll be 30 years from now, I don't know, but someday there will be some rail transit opportunity here, and we need to have a provision and a place allocated for a transit stop on property that we currently control. I think we should, because it's public land today and affordable housing is such a big thing, that should be a requirement that in some form we're enhancing our direction for affordable housing in our community. There's been talk, and Bill mentioned senior co-op housing. I think that's a terrific idea. There may be others, but I think always having that some element of affordable housing is something we can control, we should control. And then in terms of the other types of development, whether it's medical office or whatever, the development community is trying to bring, think of it again to that 9 square game, that whatever development could happen here, does it free up opportunities in other areas in this district for the next moves? And, we should be open to all of that. So those are my thoughts. I'm going to unshare my screen. I can here. There we go. And I'm sorry if I went on too long, but I felt it was important, especially like for Member Anderson, who wasn't here in all of those previous conversations, to kind of pull it out and understand what we were trying to accomplish as a district, and to know that, I think those principles are real and we got to follow them, but really realize that we don't have to solve everything on one site. And when you bang your head into the wall trying to do the same thing over and over, especially when you're dealing with plans and I wanted to share with you how that plan evolved, that it was a bunch of people that were throwing ideas together, and some of them stuck, and we put the purple in one spot versus another spot. And we just have to be nimble and try to keep to the spirit of what we're trying to achieve, but recognize that the details are going to change because that's just the nature of planning. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, very well done. I'm going to turn now to Commissioner Stanton, and was involved in this so long ago here now, and was an active participant in it both as a citizen and as a planning commissioner. So, Commissioner Stanton.
Yeah, so I think I appreciate Mike's review of that, and obviously both he and I spent a lot of time on this. At this point, I think I'm interested in hearing from Member Anderson and Member Brindle, who maybe have some more distance from this, and yourself, Mr. Mayor, just as a way of trying to. I'm in a listening mode right now, and I'm interested in what other ideas
Okay.
folks have that can fit with that.
Yep, good. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, appreciate that. Member Brindle, you've been thinking about this for a while, and then we can go to Member Anderson or Commissioner Anderson. Commissioner Brindle?
You know, when Mike finished his presentation by talking about district parking and transit location, affordable housing, medical office, accessible public space. One of, I guess, where I come back to is this is 3.3 acres. And I'm not the greatest person to say this is what I imagine here. And there have been so many ideas that have come forward, and Bill laid out with colors what one possibility is. That's actually where we ended up with the idea with the development partner that they brought forward. And I guess I don't want to feel like we're limited to those three colors, those three uses. And I know that that's not what was the intent of the comment, but I guess what I'd like to hear is, what are the other developers coming forward with? What do they see here? They're the ones who understand the market. They're the ones who understand how you go about financing something and looking it forward to make sure that it fits today and what they see in the next 30 years, 50 years. I would really like to hear what they have to say, because I'm reacting to what I understand today, but I consider that to be a pretty limited opinion. I'd like to hear what other people have to say. And frankly, I'm open to, if there's a developer that has an idea that takes, I appreciate and respect all the time that was put in on developing the framework and the guiding principles. And I would be open to selling the property to a developer who is going to honor those principles, provide something that provides district parking, provides public accessible space, and hits on the guiding principles that are in place for that property. Anybody who develops there, whether it's done under city guide or a developer guide or something, a partnership between the two, the guiding principles and the transportation plan will definitely be part of what happens there and how it happens. But I'd really be interested to hear what various ideas are coming in.
Good, thank you. Member Fisher, would you go on, Commissioner Fisher, would you go on mute? I think we've got a little bit of a choppy transmission this morning, at least I do.
Okay.
That might help us with the conversation. Thank you. Member Anderson, you have heard us talking about this off and on, and have had some thoughts yourself, I think, about what you'd like to potentially see happening over there. And I think Mr. Noondorf and Commissioner Fisher have given us a good backgrounding, and we're, of course, interested in your thoughts at this point in time as well, in terms of what you think might be the key considerations for you.
Sure. Thank you. It's interesting. You can come into a discussion group like this pretty easily thinking one way and then start to reevaluate along the way. First, I guess, I know that the four senior commissioners have spent a tremendous amount of time in various capacities, some more than others, over the course of time. And so your knowledge and the time spent is appreciated, I know, by everybody. Everyone talks about that all the time. I think what I'd like to do is just move back and forth between the discussion points that have been brought up, and then I've got some notes and some thoughts composed. So I guess first is the suggested time frame agreeable? And I'm not clear on the time frame. I know that we're in a 5-year restriction through TIF is upon us, and we have about a year to figure out what the public improvements will be based on the qualifications of that district. And as well, I know that the site continues to be and will always be really attractive to many developers. DJR was here recently. I listened to that, and I know that Franshu has a long history here. I think that the time frame for planning is as important as anything else. And so I agree completely with Member Fisher and thank him for that presentation, because it's the point that he made, and which I agree with, is that it doesn't have to be one thing that fits there, that there can be trade-offs. At the same time, I think it's very important if we're going to begin to make decisions on what to do in that site, and I think the beginning was a long time ago, but if it's going to be put in play, there has to be a real comprehensive thought given it. And I think Commissioner Fisher did a good job of kind of widening that scope and looking at that. But there are some things that I think are really important. And there are aspects of this site that lend themselves, especially to a fire station. I think that for this reason. Unless there's a better location that comes forward. I took a good look at it, and you're referencing that, Mr. Chair. I took a good look at it about a year ago. I spent a lot of time walking it, thinking about it, taking pictures of it, taking a look at the prior work, and giving some thought to how that site might develop. And I guess part of that, I was really prompted by the Five Bugles presentation, their analysis, their consultation. And frankly, their remarks during that presentation were, we have to be working on that now. Why? Well, we're increasing population. We need to do that. We need to decrease response time, which is edging up. And we don't really have sites in line on the radar right now that are available. So in looking at this site, I take a look at the south side and see it's opening onto Eden Avenue. And I think a smaller facility, which is the one that the consultant was suggesting as to serve the northeast quadrant, fits in there fairly well. And that location gives great response flexibility that allows them to get in and out. And I understand there's only 3.3 acres there. Right? So you can't fit everything in, that's for certain. Although I do believe that by building to scale, by controlling the site and using elements of farm-based design or farm-based coding that goes onto that site, and by using driveway easements to satisfy whatever occurs there, that you can really take you can take advantage of the site and discount the limitations on a certain level. So I think that to me that's kind of important in terms of how you utilize the site ultimately, whether it's open space or how that occurs. I do think a housing element is very appropriate there. And my thinking has been consistently that the north side of that site lends itself very well to a housing element. There have been proposals utilizing the south side or featuring the south side and for that. Although I think a better use of that site is the north side. My thoughts are an affordable senior cooperative. We chatted in general about senior cooperatives in the past. I have some experience in that area, and I can tell you that that type of community is an ideal setting for that site. There are attractions to senior cooperative in that you create neighborhoods, especially for older people, age-restricted housing uses. That location, by virtue of its access to grocery stores, to shops, to amenities, is a very good use for that. What fits in the middle? I'm not sure. I think if built to scale, you could get another building in there. There's two things that kind of emerge and seem to me as important public realm benefits to be accomplished in a time frame that is appropriate for them. Number one, we do need the fire station, and that is, I see, hear, and read, and am of the opinion that there is more and more of a pressing need to resolve that sooner as opposed to later. I do understand the argument about debt. At the same time, sooner or later, this is going to have to occur. And why I like that site is because we own it. And the expense that is incurred there is construction only after the public realm benefits have been completed. So to go to the number 2 point in discussion, is the mixture of uses agreeable? That it looks, the layout that I've seen this morning is pretty much what lends itself to that site. It's kind of what I've had in mind, so I think that works there. Is the process agreeable? Well, we're in a process. That process has been of long duration. I would hope it's not another 10 or 12 years before something actually occurs there. But I think that it's now beginning to pick up some steam. In terms of staff meeting with developers now, there's never anything wrong with talking to people, and that's for sure. I think that this site is unique. We do certainly own there are other publicly held lands, have buildings on some. Moving them around doesn't seem like a bad idea if that's what we came to. I think that to me, beyond the 7 guiding principles that have been established, as we consider this site, it to me, public safety and public realm benefit should be really kind of the guiding principles that are outside of those. We have an opportunity to pay attention to those 2 areas: public safety in terms of a firehouse, public realm benefit to be determined. So accepting meetings with developers, I believe, is fine. I'm reluctant to consider the fact that a developer determines what's going to happen there. It may not turn out to be what the ideal purpose for it from a public perspective is. I just don't like turning that over because it's unique, and it's going to be the last big piece of land that we have in control. And to that end, I'd like to see something substantive that residents can enjoy, can benefit from. And in this instance, again, looking at a fire station, I don't want to beat it to death because there may be other sites, but we're not in control of them. We don't have those right now. And a comprehensive plan should have, at least in this area, should have that as a primary consideration in how we solve this problem. We have a site available. If there's a better one, let's take advantage of that as we begin to consider going forward. So that's all I have.
Had to get off mute there. That was, you tended to minimize what you had to say there, but you had a lot of content in your remarks there. Really appreciate your perspective.
Thank you.
For me, I would say that the key considerations have been, again, hearkening back to these 7 principles to be followed. I think with respect to any potential development on the site, we can require adherence to those 7 principles, whether we ask developers to come forward on an RFP basis and tell us what their ideas are. We establish the parameters for what we'd like to see there, but using those 7 principles as a guideline. Other key considerations for me are that it's been unspoken, but I think some of our residents remind us from time to time, gee, don't forget to leave room for a potential future rail station, a rail hub there. And I think all of us have had that in the back of our minds, and it's a given. And so we tend not to mention it in the course of our conversations. But I think to a person on all the councils I've served on, everybody recognizes the potential importance of having a rail stop at that location, and to make sure that we preserve whatever we do there, room for people to access rail in the future, at some future time, decades from now, maybe. But nonetheless, make sure we leave room for a rail station. The public use for me is important, but over time, I feel like it doesn't necessarily need to be an indoor use. Member Fisher talked about some of the things that we've looked at, and I think a good comparator for me has been the Braemar Dome, where we just had all kinds of folks in our community supporting the notion of the dome, and we haven't had that same sort of support generally across our population for an art and culture center or a community center. So I guess I always thought it was a difficult place to have a community center. But I think the outdoor use is something that we could consider for a public realm space. And so for me, public use is important, but it can be an outdoor use and not necessarily an indoor use. That might be a more succinct way to say it. Another element of public use could be the district parking that Commissioner Fisher alluded to. That can be a public element and probably should be a public element over there. And a question I would have for staff would be, can district parking be adequate in a way on the public works site where we could sell the property we own behind the Jerry's complex as part of the overall planning? That might be something to take a look at. Would that free up that parking behind Jerry's, which is going to need some repair soon? Does that land have more value to us from a sales standpoint, a development standpoint, than it does from a parking standpoint? And can we accommodate parking for the whole district on that 3.3 acres and still allow for some other uses to occur there? In terms of what Member Anderson mentioned, I could potentially see this as a site for a fire station, theoretically to serve the Northeast, but I think it's not as well positioned as it could be, being west of Highway 100. It allows for some movements to the south and the northwest pretty easily, but I think getting across Highway 100 and then getting northeast, I see time constraints there, and I'd rather potentially work with MnDOT on whether or not we could do something with cleaning up all of those entrances and exits off Highway 100 next to some of the historic buildings that we have, to see if that could be a potential site for a firehouse. I also wouldn't rule out Weber Park as a priority location. So I'm not ruling out a firehouse at this location, but I think there are better locations to be had that more effectively serve the northeast part of our community. That would be east of Highway 100. So I'd like to explore working with MnDOT a little bit on that property that Member Fisher described. I could see a combination of medical and firehouse use on that public works site, to Commissioner Anderson's point. So I'm open to that idea as well. The timing issue, I like the TIF timeline, but we've been looking at this for over a decade now, and I would just as soon be moving forward on all fronts. I'm not sure the pandemic has diminished the value of this property. We can tell folks what we'd like to see on the site. As to Member Brindle's point, I join her in thinking I'd like to see developers coming forward with ideas for the site based on certain broad parameters that we might establish. And I'm open to selling it to a developer who follows the principles that we establish. And I think that's something that we're going to have to contemplate anyway, whenever we start the process. But I'm just of the mindset that we should be moving forward on all fronts. And even though we're in the midst of this pandemic, I think this is a good time for people to be doing a lot of planning. And I think one of those pieces of planning could be for us to be thinking about what are we going to do with this property, and let's move forward with ideas that might evolve there. I personally like the idea, the combination of the senior co-op housing. I think by its very nature, it's affordable housing. We look at 7500 York, which was the first senior co-op in the country. Over there, those units sell for between, I think, $45,000 and $100,000. To me, that's inherently affordable for seniors, and I think we would see something of the nation of uses with district parking, where senior co-ops don't need as much parking as you might otherwise need for a multi-family building. We could use that area to the north of the property for that district parking. Have some outdoor public element, and I think it is a good location on the south side for some type of medical use. And whether that's a combination of medical and firehouse or just straight medical, that would free up some of the other properties, like the old Mr. Steak next to Jerry's, or the old realty building that Edina Family Physicians is in right now. That might be a possibility as well, and it would allow us to work on those parts of the district too. So those are just some of my general thoughts at this point in time. That prompt anything from Commissioner Stanton?
Yeah, I think those are all very helpful thoughts for me. I'm part of the reason I wanted to hear from everybody is I'm like Member Fisher. I've spent a lot of time invested in this, and just want to try and be flexible while maintaining the concepts and the principles that we work so hard to lay out. And I look through these guiding principles, and the ones that kind of jump out at me are number one, which talks about leveraging the publicly owned parcels and the civic presence, which I think Commissioner Fisher talked about very effectively. The second one talks about enhancing the district's economic viability as a neighborhood center with regional connections. So I think, to me, that kind of speaks to the form of whatever gets developed here, and the character and the kind of feeling that gets created by whatever we add here. And then I think the sixth one, which talks about improving movement within and access to the district, and also talks about preserving these future transit opportunities, is an important one too. I think the old bus garage redevelopment has helped put more people there. Now we still have a lot of work to do with making it more pedestrian friendly, and I think that talks about Vernon Avenue shrinking down so that it's easier to cross, and thinking about what kind of development here on the public works site could help that. And I do think, this effort to make sure we're using it in some public way, I think a lot of these things we're talking about are really public interest, whether that be some kind of affordability in housing through the senior co-op housing or something, or some kind of space that might be outdoor space associated with that. And then maybe a fire hall. I think I wouldn't exclude that idea. I think, everybody's made good comments about the possibility of doing that on the other side of the freeway and access and purpose, and that probably merits some more discussion. So I'm certainly happy to see us move forward with something, and I'm willing to be more flexible in what exactly goes on there. I think if we just kind of keep our eye on these 7 guiding principles as we move forward, I think that'll serve us well.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I wanted to follow up
So
on
is that Commissioner Fisher?
Yes, it is. I wanted to follow up. I think Commissioner Anderson really made a compelling statement about the fire hall, and I think his intuition about location of things on the site is good as well. And I want to be very clear that while I suggested a better location for the fire hall might be on the east side of Highway 100, it compels, Commissioner Anderson really compelled me to make it clear that we shouldn't give up this public site for a fire hall until we know for sure we have a better site. So while it might not, in my opinion, be the best site, it's a pretty good site for a fire hall. But if we can get a slightly better response time and more, I feel better being on the east side of the highway in terms of being in that quadrant. And if we can get, but I think that is something from a planning perspective we should nail down before we give up in any way, fully give up this site for the public use, such as a fire hall. So I just want to be very clear that I'm actually in agreement on that. So thank you.
And I think that was embedded in my comment too on the fire hall location. I wouldn't want to give up that location as a fire hall potential location until I knew for sure that we didn't have anything that we could have actually in the northeast quadrant. So, Manager Neuendorf, was this conversation helpful to you? Or are you still looking for a little bit firmer direction?
I think this has been great direction. So you've given me some clarity in moving forward, clarity as far as time frame and openness. We're happy to explore other ideas. Currently when people have called, I've just told them that the site is not available and left it at that. So to your initial question, Commissioner Brindle, about interest in what specifically others are interested in, we've just turned them away. We had been waiting for this housing study, but we're happy to entertain other conversations. Certainly, if the preliminary planning work takes time, and so we can do some of that work now, and look forward to coming up with a proposal a few months down the road. So that's very helpful. The discussion is very, very helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
All right. Yes.
I think the thing that we talked about at the last HRA meeting was discussions with developers. And I wanted to let you know that we're not, speaking for staff, we're not against or opposed to interacting with developers, hearing their ideas, and that sort of thing. We do that all the time. But I can tell you that all of those discussions ultimately end with when can we get in front of the council, and when can we get a work session, and how much TIF do you think we could get? I mean, that sort of next level of question is the one that are the questions that we have been shutting down, right? So because we don't really have a process for comparing an offer from Kelly Doran to Bill Catter to Frauenschuh. When we get to that next level of discussion, we'll bring that back, and we'll have to get some more clarity from council and HRA on those kinds of issues. But as it stands, we can talk to people and we can hear their ideas, and that would give us a sense of where the market is, and that gives us a sense of what we think the value and the best uses of that property might be. Because ultimately, I think what we need to do as an organization is decide what we think needs to go on these 3 acres, and then proceed into the market from that standpoint. That gives us a much clearer it gives us a much clearer path to a successful development.
Can I jump in with a couple of stray thoughts, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Just a couple of things. One is the notion has been discussed of some medical office. I would be interested in what the development community thinks about that, but I think we should be very careful about what the future is of that, given where we've come through the whole virus issue, and I think we could be changing the whole future notion of medical office pretty quickly. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And then I had another thought, but it has escaped me. So if it comes back, I'll let you know.
Well, that was a good cautionary note, and I'm sure that information came from close to home. So that's good to think about. I was thinking that Member Brindle and I have probably been the most sort of aggressive about, being able to move forward on both fronts, the TIF front, I'll call it, and starting a dialogue with developers. This does seem to me, as I mentioned earlier, a good time for folks to be thinking about projects that might commence post-pandemic, and it might, with the long planning horizons that we have on everything, I am comfortable, along with Member Brindle, in seeing what developers are interested in, what they might come forward with in terms of ideas framed around those 7 principles. And then that might help us sort some things out as well. But we do have these general ideas in mind that are pretty consistent. What I was worried about was that for Manager Neuendorf, he's getting a mixed message that a couple of us were more interested in pushing everything forward now, and I wasn't sure about the other 3. Member Fisher seems to be comfortable with the timeline. Somebody have a cell phone on along with the. There we go. All right.
Mr. Chair.
So anyway, yes.
So one thing Manager Neal said that I guess I would like clarification on is if we are going to if we're going to take calls from developers, I don't want to have a preconceived notion of what we want on that site. I want to hear what they think belongs on that site. I don't know why we are so stuck on what we've been shown that can go on that site. Why are we so stuck on that if a developer were to come in with something we haven't heard about, that we would actually prescribe what we want to hear by saying, this is what we see on this site, now tell us how you would do that? Why would we limit the discussion? I just don't understand that.
Well, maybe I didn't articulate very well what I was thinking, but beyond this, we've seen some ideas that we think have some merit, but for me personally, I was thinking that we establish that what they bring forward has to give consideration to the 7 principles, but beyond that, they can come forward with whatever ideas they want. Otherwise, how are we going to be able to determine what we think would be best for the site? We've seen some things that are encouraging, but I wouldn't limit it either.
So that's my point.
Yeah. So maybe I didn't express that very well, but I'm with you on that one. Executive Director Neal?
Well, Commissioner Brindle was referring, if you were referring to the comments that I was making, what I would tell you is I think it is a good idea actually for the HRA to give a sense of what you want to see in general on that site. If maybe it's 200 units of Well, as I think Bill laid it out, maybe it's a residential use, a public open space use, and a commercial / public use, and then see what proposals you get in response to that. To say to someone, to the development community, you know, whatever, you know, what do you think should go on there, and then to try to complete some sort of competitive selection process that compares competitive ideas would be difficult, I think. I think you can have enough flexibility in that process where you can get, you know, a Nolan Mains kind of development. When we put together that competitive process at Market Street in France, we gave a general sense of what we wanted to see on that part of the in that part of the community, and we got back very different proposals, but they were all in response to a general sense of what the council wanted to see in that area.
Mr. Chair, if I could piggyback on that, the other stray thought that I had lost earlier is we should be open, and the Nolan Mains is a good analogy because, you know, we originally, when we went out to the development community, we said, you know, we've got this parking ramp and we've got these couple of properties on the north side of what is now Market Street. And one of those people in the community came back and said, well, how about if we combine it with this property you have on the south side of the street as well, and created something that was really smart and really effective. And here we have a building that is dying to redevelop just across Arcadia from this site. So a combination that would leverage that to give us some more flexibility and some more possibilities, I would be very interested in hearing.
All right. Yeah, good thought. Member
Mr. Chair.
Sure.
So I think we're probably all saying the same thing. I appreciate Commissioner Brindle's comment. She's looking for creative options, and Commissioner Stanton described a perfect example of that. At the same time, it's really important that we have the non-negotiables, or the, you know, what are we requiring on this property? It's like giving the formula in a sense. And the example I would use there is on the city council recently, we saw a sketch plan for the U.S. Bank site on France Avenue. Well, U.S. Bank owns the site. I'm assuming that they gave their developers, as they were talking to them, their non-negotiables, which is, we're going to still have a bank presence on this site, and it's going to have this and it's going to have that. Beyond that, go figure out a great development for our property. We would be doing the same thing. We need to say, here's our property, what are your ideas? But oh, by the way, we need to have these 3 or 4 things, but now go get creative. And I think the key to that, based on the conversation that I've heard today, is that we should be intentional soon about the fire hall. And do we have better locations or not? We got to figure that out. And if not, then the fire hall is going to be one of the non-negotiables here. If it's not, and that's a big element. The problem we've had in our past conversations with developers is we're just not quite set on what we want on our site, and it mucks up the whole thing. And we could end up right back where we started if we're not certain about the fire hall. We need certainty in that element. Otherwise, it's just substituting fire hall for art center, and we're in the same place. And so I think that's a task we could set forth right now. Go out, figure out, do we have a better site for the northeast part of our city for a fire hall? And if we don't, this is it. Now we know what our non-negotiables are, and then we can ask for creative solutions. That's what I think our absolute task should be leaving this meeting.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Director Neal.
I couldn't have said that any better. I completely agree. I think that's a concrete task. We have enough information about our call loads. We have identified the attributes we're looking for in a site. That is a task that we could take on and I think complete in relatively short order.
All right. What about the, as we're talking about elements here that are important to us, what about district parking? And that seemed to be another common thread here in the conversation, is that we saw the importance of district parking here. Whether we add in the building on Arcadia or not, it seems like that's something we need to contemplate. And what's the future of the Jerry's ramp? Is that something that could be addressed short term?
Yeah, I'm less enthusiastic about requiring some major pumping facility on here, and I know that's not what you said exactly, but I think Mike's kind of comment about 9 Square and figuring out parking in the district that may or may not be on this site makes sense. But I'm really anxious about the notion of creating a whole bunch of parking now at a high expense that not be as necessary in the future. I don't know. I don't know that I would make that
Okay. All right.
But it would partly depend on what it was combined with in other sites, whether that be the Jerry's ramp or the building across Arcadia.
It's been part of every proposal we've seen, so that's why I wanted to ask the question too. Manager Neuendorf.
Yes, thanks. With the Jerry's ramp, that's a really clever idea. Certainly, we can look into the future of that particular facility. 2 immediate constraints, though, that might limit action in the near term. There's the water treatment facility on the lower level of that ramp that would be required to remain in place or be relocated. That would be very expensive. And then the ramp is also currently attached to the zoning approval for Jerry's office building. So at this point in time, we couldn't remove that ramp unless Jerry's could come up with alternative parking. So I think those are 2 short-term hindrances. Certainly in the future, if people drive less 20 years from now, maybe we don't need the parking. But in the near term, it'd be difficult to get rid of Jerry's ramp altogether.
So understanding that we've got a critical water treatment facility in the lower level, understood that. Understood Jerry's was using it for parking as part of their development. It still seems to me like there are air rights there that have value to Jerry's, where they could still accommodate the parking they need to have, but may be interested in expanding that. And the question for me was whether we need both. We can certainly protect our water treatment operation, and in the process of selling anything above it or retaining that or condominiumizing it, I don't see that as a big issue. But I do think, why do we need 2 public? Maybe we would need 2 public parking facilities, basically side by side over there. So anyway, that was one thought I had. All of this whole conversation speaks to us thinking in how to move forward and how to attract ideas, but certainly the fire station is one that requires some immediate consideration. So, Member Brindle, does this track with what you were thinking about, but maybe didn't express in quite the same way? Are you thinking about a broader sort of look?
No, I mean, that's fine. I just didn't want to get too far into the weeds on the technicalities of what we want to see here, and in order that we would end up coming up with a plan that we already have.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I just didn't want to prescribe it so completely that we see that we have 3 distinct uses with public parking below and medical office facing to the south. Well, I guess I'm not interested in prescribing it to that level. So that was my point.
Yeah, but I think that's understandable. But I do think the conversation with staff from developers that could potentially be interested in would involve at least a partial conversation about, well, what's the council shown some interest in so far? Well, one thing you would say would be senior cooperative housing. They've shown an interest in that. But regardless of whether it's senior cooperative housing or some other kind of housing that you might be interested in putting there, there's going to be an affordability element required, which sort of inherently gets satisfied by senior co-op. So they would be told that information, that even if you went to market, there's got to be an element of affordability. And as to what happens in the rest of the site, there's got to be some public element to it. I think we've all been consistent about that. Whether that's an indoor or an outdoor element, we've kind of vacillated on that, although it seems to me that we've been moving towards an outdoor element of public use more than an indoor element based on budgetary constraints. So, but I want to make sure that I want to make sure we're as broad as we can be to satisfy what you're thinking about too.
Yeah, and well, thank you. And many of those things are covered in the guiding principles too. So, so that's where I am.
Okay. Head us in a direction that you think your staff can work with, you and your staff.
Yep, I do.
Okay.
And I didn't mention the fire station, but it is of utmost importance. And if this is the best site, then this is the best site.
All right, and I think we have a commonality of opinion on the railhead or a station.
Yep.
Serving space for a rail station in the future on any development. Okay, good. All right, so we've got some common, we got the 7 principles. We've got some common understanding of what we'd like to see there. I think that's enough to move forward with.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Member Fisher, Commissioner Fisher.
I think we also have more common understanding of the district parking than maybe it seems. When I say district parking, I think Commissioner Stanton really probably described it best, that I think in this area we have to allow for district thinking. So that's parking, it could be district energy, it could be district stormwater solutions. It's all of that. And whether or not we solve them all on this site or the next site, I think when we talk to developers, we don't have to be so prescriptive and say, you know, we need 200 parking spots on this site. I think that there are bonus points for coming up with district solutions that may or may not be directly on this parcel. It might be someone, I think Commissioner Stanton mentioned that maybe the developer will assemble other parcels and say, here's how we can solve this in a bigger way. And that's where I think Commissioner Brindle's got something here, where let's not limit creativity. We have the guiding principles to keep the guides there. And so for some of these things, we can be a little bit less prescriptive, but throw it out there as these are elements that we're obviously going to be looking to. And then, of course, the fire hall thing, as we've already talked about, we need to be more sure about. But I think we've got a path for that.
All right, good. Thanks for that. Well, I see that we are at 9:06 on the conversation, and if there's nothing further on that topic, we could move on to other portions of the meeting and then adjourn. No correspondence was shown on the agenda. Has anything changed there? Is any correspondence coming that we need to be aware of?
No, I don't think anything came in time for this packet.
Nope.
Okay. And then as to HRA commissioners' comments, any commissioner comments that you want to share with us? Okay. Is there a motion for adjournment? Member Brindle moves. Is there a second? Need a second, Member Stanton? All right, thank you. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, relative to adjournment. Ms. Garsky?
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Brindle,
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Staunton,
Aye.
Chair Hovland.
Aye. We stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody. It was a very good conversation.
Thank you.
Have a great day.